Need to talk about difficulties in international trade. Details beginning to emerge on the scale of the rebuild required after the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. Officials estimating a replacement could cost at least $2 billion, while insurers are facing claims of as much as $3 billion for cargo on board the ship, according to Barclays analysts. One detail that remains unknown is how long it will take to reopen Baltimore's port and how that could affect supply chains along America's eastern seaboard. Joining us around the table for some insight is the CEO of DHL Supply Chain, Oscar de Bock. Oscar, good morning to you, sir. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Just how far down the supply chain do you expect to see some impacts, some ripples, consequences fall out from what's developed this week?
Yeah, the thing is the main impact of this one is more in the automotive roll-on, roll-off. It's less on the container part. Of course, there is a container element in there. Actually, we got a few containers on the ship as well, which we need to manage at the moment. But I think if you see one thing, and we were discussing that earlier, if you see one common theme in supply chain management over the past 4 years, is that ability to fast respond, that agility to fast make changes into how a supply chain is organized. And I think that's what you're going to see here as well. You're going to see a shift from container movements from this port to other ports. You're going to see. So I think while the impact to the port itself is dramatic, while obviously the event itself is tragic, but the overall impact on the global supply chain and the US supply chain, I think will not be as large as you would fear.
You mentioned you've got some containers on the ship. Can you just walk us through how those conversations go in the last couple of days? What are communications like?
Yeah, I don't. Obviously, I've not been directly involved in the discussion on that, but I mean, it's a few containers, so it's not compared to the number of containers we have there. But one of the things is you need to make sure of how we get them released and how we can find alternative routes for them, how we make sure that our customers can plan the products that are in there, alternative routes, alternative plans, alternative products, so to keep those supply chains running. And I think the main, I was saying that probably of a last interview with Bloomberg at the time, where I said there is something around the corner in supply chains every time, we just don't know what it is. I could not have guessed that now we will be talking about obviously this event. And I think one of the main things that you see is that both our customers and ourselves, but I would say everybody working around supply chain, but actually also everybody working in other parts of our customers, is now far more attuned to having to respond, fast decision making, using data to make sure that we can have the alternatives and fast found alternative solutions how to manage the supply chain. Because I think this is one of those events that there will be happening.
Which raises the question of how much you have to sort of create redundancies inherent in your supply chains and in your system in order to be flexible to handle, say, a 2-hour delay because you've got to go a different route around Baltimore and get into Washington, D.C. Things that seem like they'd be disasters if I were traveling with my kids, but you have to manage and make the time seem the same.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important point where in the past, let's say more than 4 years ago, it was all about just in time, right? It was all about having the lowest stock levels possible, having the most efficient and cost-effective supply chain. What you now see is it's far more about the resilience of supply chains to make sure that they're organized in such a way that you can respond to these things. Because if you got your minimum stock levels, then obviously a 2-hour delay is actually dramatic. If you make sure that you build the supply chain in such a way that you can respond to that, it already helps. And I think that's something that you see happening at the moment, is that rather that the let's say the minor cost is the main thing, now it is making sure that supply chain keep running, because many of our customers have now realized that supply chain is more about availability and making sure that you can continue to serve customers rather than only having minimal levels and minimum cost.
Does this make the just-in-time promise that so many companies were trying to offer less of a possibility or even a desired outcome, and more just the resiliency and the ability to be flexible, much more of the priority?
I think it's exactly, it's the availability of products which comes far more the priority than purely the just-in-time, because what we all have learned is that the cost of a disoptimized supply chain because of an event is way higher than having a 5 or 10% lower or higher stock level. Now obviously with today's interests, stock levels have become obviously more relevant to reduce those, and that's I think where also the whole element of data analytics converting into AI converting into generative AI come in as well, to make sure that we plan supply chains real time, better and better, on the use of data and also on the use of historical data. And there's a lot of historical data in the past 4 years that helps us to learn how you can respond to things.
What makes shipping so complicated is because Secretary Pete Buttigieg talked about this yesterday. There's no like air traffic controller like there is for flying when it comes to logistics, when it comes to shipping. How can technology change that to make it more transparent?
Well, when we talk about port control, there actually is. So, for instance, in ports, there is a traffic control and a connection between the ports. So I think in shipping, it's more advanced than it makes it seem. And I think some of the elements that you could see in this event as well is that they have been able to respond pretty fast to avoid even more dramatic events because of a good communication that there was. So, but you're right. The use of data and is fast evolving. And one of the things that you see in general in the logistics sector is that the amount of investments that goes into the sector compared to 4 years ago is exponentially more. That means that the amount of innovation in the sector is exponentially more. And that you see that in data, in what we can do with data and what we can do with data analytics. You see that in robotic solution and other innovations. So therefore you see a fast evolvement. I would say internally, I always say that if you look at the last 4 years, the speed of innovation in the logistics sector compared to the 10 years before is mind-boggling. So it is. So that is actually which helps us to further increase and improve compared to the airline industry, where you see the opposite.
When you look at the communication between the government, Pete Buttigieg again today, being shippers and supply chain logistic partners, how has that communication been between the public and private?
In these type of events, I think the collaboration between public and private, well, if you take, for instance, the example between ports, because ports is in some cases public, some cases private, some cases the mix of both. I think there is a good interaction, but I think if you look at the speed within which that has evolved on the business side, so for instance, now the interactions with companies is far more on sea level than where that before would be 2 levels down. Because CEOs and CFOs of our customers see the importance of being very close of what's happening in supply chains, because that's a differentiator in your profitability, your market share, your growth. I think gradually governments need to make that same step. To make sure that to understand how important it is for the success of the economy to really be close to the infrastructure, and that's not only hardware but it's also software, and those investments need to come from there as well.
You talk a lot about building out resilience. When we look at supply chains, particularly over the last few years, things feel quite fragile. From your perspective, are things more fragile or more resilient over the last few years post-pandemic?
I think to use different words, I think the capability to respond to the unexpected has evolved enormously. The only problem is that the unexpected happens more than in the past. So I think it has improved a lot. And that is because of bigger investments, the view of necessity of having those capabilities. But on the other hand, the number of events is evolving faster than the development of the sector. But I must say, if you look at, if I talk about DHL, but if I also talk about the market in general and our customers, the capability of responding to things has evolved enormously.
So does that mean that you're able to charge more and that shipping will in general cost more because building in resilience is expensive?
Charge more and cost more are 2 different things, right? Because I think what you see is that because the professionalization of the sector has evolved, and therefore the value that it brings has evolved. So it might be that there is a higher price to pay, but actually the benefit might also be higher. So that doesn't necessarily translate in higher cost, because the efficiencies might be improved as well.
Oscar, thoughtful stuff. It's good to see you. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
Oscar de Bock there, the CEO of DHL Supply Chain.